and welcome to the Art of Being Human. We've been talking about sleep, sleep apnea, sleep cycles, dreaming, and all of that. And I want to start today and kind of finish this, but I want to start and talk about sensory deprivation experiments. Now, our brains have to have sensation to be normal. We have to be able to feel something, see something, taste something, touch something. You know, we need to do all of that. Our senses are active, and we need to be able to experience them because that's the way the brain gets information about the world, and that's very important also in your problem solving. If you don't have your senses, then your brain cannot develop in any kind of a normal way at all. And what happens is that the brain creates its own sensation if it's not getting real sensation from our usual senses, touch, taste, smell, vision, and all of that. So there was a period of time, and I think it may be still going on, but I'm not sure, when people conducted sensory deprivation experiments. What if you couldn't see, and you couldn't hear, and you couldn't touch, and you couldn't smell, and you couldn't taste? All of your senses were taken away from you. And that was an experiment, and I know some of these experiments were on college campuses and the students were paid for them. And the student thought, well, this is an easy way to make money, but it turns out not to be an easy way to make money, but it was something that they were paid to do, and that's the reason that they did it. So what happens in a sensory deprivation experiment, and believe me, I would never, never do it. And if you're offered and you're a college student, I can't tell you what to do, but I don't think it would be a good thing to participate in. But what happens is they would put you in a chamber, just a round chamber, and they would have you so covered up that you couldn't see. Your ears would be blocked so you couldn't hear. Your hands would be wrapped up so you couldn't have any sensation of touch. You'd be laying on a form, or some kind of a platform, where you wouldn't actually feel your body against it. You know, when you lay down, you feel the mattress that you're laying down on, or you feel the pillow that your head is on. No feeling at all. So it's like you're suspended in a chamber with no senses coming your way at all. Now, many students said, well, I'll just sleep, you know, and of course some part of people, they probably did just sleep. But your brain needs sensation, and if it doesn't get it, after a while, maybe 3 or 4 days of it, these students couldn't take it anymore, and they would start creating their own sensations. If your brain doesn't have normal sensation, it creates its own. So they started hallucinating. And they started seeing things, bright colors, images of things. It was really regular hallucinations, and they probably had sound hallucinations. You know, you can have hallucinations that deal with touch and sound and taste. You can hallucinate and see things that are not there. You can have auditory hallucinations where you hear things that are not there. And so it goes. And so it wasn't long before these students were removed from the chambers and given sensation again, because you have to have it. The brain has to have it. So it didn't take long, maybe 3 or 4 days, maybe even less than that, then the hallucinations would start. And it would be like a dream state. It would be like maybe you were on LSD or something, but it could be very bizarre. These hallucinations could be very bizarre because the brain requires stimulation. Now, I also remember that in wartime, I think it was World War II, some babies whose parents had died or whatever, they were put in these homes to take care of them, and there was no stimulation. They actually did some experiments with them, and they were changed. I mean, they weren't put in any chambers or anything like that. They were changed and they were fed, but other than that, there was nothing. They were constantly in their cribs. There were no pictures on the wall. They were just laying there. There were no toys. No one was picking them up and talking to them or handling them in any kind of way. So there's no physical contact other than being changed, either the clothes changed or the diapers changed. There was practically no stimulation, nothing certainly that a baby requires. And after a while, these babies had a condition called marasmus. And it was a mental illness that they developed because they weren't being handled, they weren't being touched, they weren't being talked to, they weren't being sung to. No one picked them up. Nobody used a rattle and played with them or something like that. There was no sensation for them other than the necessity, and that's what it was. Have these babies lay in a crib all day, never picked up, never played with, just fed as necessary or changed as necessary, and that's what it was. All these children became ill as a result of that, and I actually think that some children died as a result of this. I think it was cruel and abusive and never should have happened. It wouldn't happen now as far as I'm concerned. I haven't heard of anything like this happening, although I do have somebody that I know that went to China to adopt a child, and they said the condition of these children and the homes that they were in were just really stark and plain, hardly any toys, maybe one toy for all of the children to play with, and it just was a pitiful place for any human being to be raised in. And so that goes on, and that's practically the same thing. And so, you know, in some cultures maybe that still goes on, but this was an experiment to see how babies would react because they had the babies and they just decided to do that, and that is not a good thing at all. So that's sensory deprivation experiments. You have to have sensation. Now let's go on to the sleep and wake cycles. There are two types of sleep, as you know, the non-REM sleep, non-rapid eye movement, and the REM sleep, which is rapid eye movement, and that can be defined by the brain waves. You have brain waves, and every stage that you go into has a brain wave that you will that would be seen if it was being tracked on an EEG. EEG, which is the electroencephalogram, where they put electrodes on your head and they can track the brain waves, and it's not a painful test, but they'll show you things, or they'll create sounds, and they see how you react and how your brain waves change. That can all be tracked, or you may go in for a sleep experiment because maybe you're having too much trouble sleeping, and they check you and find out what your brain waves are doing. So there are the REM, we know, is the dream, where you do your dreams and where your muscles become limp. But there are 4 stages of the non-REM sleep, and what happens is that you kind of go in and out of those stages all night long, except for the time that you're in REM sleep. So I want to talk to you about the stages and then show you on a chart I have what those brain waves look like. I've drawn them out because I didn't have a chance to go to a photocopier and photocopy them. Stage 1, just as you're falling asleep, your eyes are closed and you're relaxed, and you kind of feel like you're drifting. Your thoughts are kind of going here and there. Sometimes it doesn't make much sense, and you get like little snatches of a dream. You know, you just for a second or two. It's very nonsensical. It doesn't mean a whole lot, but that's the first stage of sleep. The second stage of sleep is where the electroencephalograph shows that the brain waves are getting irregular and sleep spindles appear. And what that is as you see the brain waves, one of the waves will shoot up in like a spike, and there will be certain spikes. You're now in stage 2. And the arousal to get you awake again is a difficult thing. Stage 3, the sleep deepens, and the vital signs kind of go down, you know, they kind of decline. You're not breathing as hard, you're not breathing as much. Your theta and delta waves will appear. Those are more or less the sleep waves, and that is about 20 minutes after stage 1 you can actually enter into stage 3. And then stage 4 is when slow wave sleep occurs, and you have the very large and very slow brain waves, and they just they're there, and you're basically in deep sleep. You have delta waves that predominate, and the vital signs are at their lowest level. It's difficult to awake a person, and at that time you might have bedwetting, you might have sleepwalking, and you might have night terrors. Night terrors, I've talked to you about them before, is when you have these awful dreams. It's not like the REM sleep dream. dreams, but where you become afraid, terribly afraid. And children will have night terrors, and they usually just go away, but they'll be screaming. They'll wake up screaming. They're frightened by something that they saw in a dream. And you know, when you first wake up in a dream, it's almost as if it's real. You're not sure what's real and what's not. I know I've had dreams, and I've woken up from dreams, and I've really still been in a kind of a sleep state and thought the dream was real and start to want to act on it. Then suddenly I wake up enough to know that, oh, that was just a dream. It wasn't anything else. So you drift back and forth in these stages of sleep during the night. The REM sleep is really basically alpha waves, and it's very close to the waking state. And the eyes move rapidly. I know I've mentioned this before, so consider this to be a little bit of a review. The eyes move rapidly because this is when dreaming is concerned, and you are actually watching the dream as if it was like a movie. So the eyes move rapidly underneath the eyelids. And most dreaming occurs in the REM state, except for the night terrors. Nightmares and night terrors occur during the non-REM sleep. Regular dreams occur in the REM sleep, but you can get night terrors and nightmares in another stage, the non-REM sleep, stages 3 and 4. The brain waves change with age, with illness, and the state of the body, so that they're not just solid and stable here. The brain waves are tracked by the electroencephalogram, which is a machine in which electrodes are put on your head, and it doesn't hurt, but they will show you images and they will make certain sounds, and they want to see what your brain is going to actually be doing. They do the same thing in sleep studies, where they watch the brain waves and see how they change, and they can tell you what your sleep problems are, and then they work to correct them if you have sleep problems, because people who don't sleep well can become psychotic. I know there are some people that try to stay awake, and there have been experiments. Stay awake as long as you can. And it's not like sleep deprivation. There's no deprivation, but they're trying to see what happens to you if you stay awake and you don't sleep because you're staying awake. Well, usually your body will shut down and you'll sleep and you don't have any control of it. This is why people get into accidents. They think if they're sleepy and they can still drive, all they have to do is eat while they're driving, or roll down the window, or turn up the radio with loud music. That usually does not help. That's not going to keep you awake, unfortunately. When your body gets to that state where it has to have sleep, you go out. You just go out and you sleep. You know, you just kind of, you're gone. And the body has its sleep, and you wake up, and the television's still blaring, and the radio is still on, and you've missed a show that you were watching because you fell asleep because you were too tired. It's very dangerous in driving because you think you can force yourself to stay awake when you're asleep, but basically you can't. And if you do force yourself to stay awake for a longer period of time than you should, you can't get anything done. You feel drugged, you feel unstable, you don't concentrate well, you start making mistakes. You can't work at an active pace. You're just dragging yourself from one thing to another thing. And it's just not healthy, and you're not being very creative. If you need to sleep, you need to sleep. So the brain waves are always present, even in an unconscious state or even in a coma. And if they're not there and you flatline, that means you've really passed away. If you don't have brain waves, you're really dead. In epilepsy, there's a torrent of brain waves, a discharge of brain waves inappropriately. Suddenly the brain is active and the neurons are all firing, and it puts you into seizures. Epilepsy does not affect the IQ, but sometimes if you have like grand mal seizures, you'll just collapse because you have no control of the muscles, and the muscles are in spasm, and you're jerking around, sometimes foaming at the mouth, and sometimes you go down with some kind of a cry, some kind of a sound, and you may know when it's coming because you see an aura, you may see color, or you might see light, and that's that's like a signal that you know that a seizure is on the way. So you would find a place to lay down if you can, so you won't be dropping to the floor. Otherwise, you are going to fall on the floor. About 1 out of every 100 have epilepsy. It can be caused by genetics. It can be caused by a brain injury. It can be caused by a stroke, blows to the head, infections, tumors, anything that's disruptive of the brain can cause it. There is such a thing as an absence, what's called absence seizures, spelled A-B-S-E-N-C-E, and these are petit mal seizures, and where they're mild, you kind of phase out of the picture for a few minutes, and then you come back. You get that more in young children, and it usually disappears by age 10. So I read, however, I have known adults to have it. And you have a seizure called tonic-clonic. I know it sounds odd. Tonic-clonic, but these are the grand mal seizures where the person loses consciousness, and sometimes bones can be broken, and muscles contractions can be so intense that the bones are broken. You can have loss of bladder and bowel control, severe biting of the tongue. It usually lasts only a few minutes, and then the muscles relax, and the person wakes up, but they're groggy for a while. They feel disoriented. Usually it's caused by, it's usually treated with drugs, anti-seizure medication, but they do have something called a vagus nerve stimulator that's implanted under your skin, and it gives you a kind of an electrical impulse every so often and prevents the brain from having that torrent of activity that causes you to go into a grand mal seizure. What I want to do, we have a little time left, not much. I want to show you this chart of the brain waves, and so I've drawn them. These are not from a book. I've drawn them. And the reason is I just didn't have a chance to do any photocopying. So with a magnifying glass and a pen, I drew about what they are. The awake state is right here. You notice there's like a little bunch of waves right there. But that's the way it is. It has a little spiking, not a whole lot, but a little spiking up and down. It's pretty regular. In the REM sleep is similar. You have your vital signs active, and it's very similar to the awake state, a little bit more active. I've got one of these spindles down, and maybe there's a more activity. It goes down and up more, but basically it's similar to the awake state. The eyes are closed, you relax, you're drifting, the vital signs are normal, and so it's basically a drifting sensation that you have. Now let's go to stage 1. And I'm going to read it off the chart. It'll be easier than my looking at it. This is what the waves look like. The eyes are closed, you relax, drifting sensation, vital signs normal on alpha waves. Let's go to stage 2. You can see in stage 2 that there's more spindles. You can, as you look at them, here's a spindle, here's a spindle, and they go down as well as up. There seems to be more irregularity in the encephalogram brain waves with a sleep spindle. Let's go down to stage 3, and then you have your sleep deepens, you have delta waves, and you can see how irregular that is. It's much more irregular than stage 1 and 2, and so you have like, you can have some bunched up. Let's see, you have some bunched up. Stage 3, sleep deepens, and you have the delta waves. And let's look at stage 4. These are slow, deep waves with delta waves, and they're up and down pretty much all over the place. So those are the stage 4 brain waves. And what you do is you go up and down through these brain waves as you sleep during the night. The only other thing would be the REM sleep, which we've already talked about, is where you have your dreams and then you have your awake state. Stage 1 is practically awake, but REM stage is different because you're dreaming. So I think we need to close it here. And we're going to go into, next time, we're going to go into cerebral palsy, some other chronic illnesses I'm going to go into. And then when I do that, after I do that, I'm going to get into autoimmune responses or immunodeficiency responses in different illnesses. We'll be getting into AIDS, HIV and AIDS, and how that occurs and how one goes into the other. You know, you can have HIV for years before you get into full-blown AIDS. And it's not the death sentence that it used to be because of drug cocktails where they give you drug upon drug upon drug. The problem with AIDS is that, you know, it mutates into something else. Some of these illnesses, you have medications that stop them, and then they become resistant to the medications, and you have a resistance problem, and then the medication is no longer helpful. We're running into that, especially with the overuse of antibiotics, and we'll see what that's all about too. So I'm going to close it here, and please join me next time.